Commerce Secretary Ron Brown and 32 others were on a military plane that crashed today in a violent storm. There are no known survivors at this time.
On April 3, 1996, an Air Force jet carrying 35 passengers and crew, including Secretary of Commerce Ron Brown and 24 business delegates, crashed in the mountains outside of Dubrovnik, Croatia. There were no survivors of the crash of IFO Flight 21. The trade delegation was exploring business opportunities and exchanging technology and resources in a region whose infrastructure had been badly damaged and was largely non-existent after a devastating war. The bodies of the American victims returned to the United States and were met by their grieving families at Dover Air Force Base. The Air Force conducted an extensive investigation, and after months of fact-gathering, their final report was over 7,000 pages long, and found several contributing factors to the crash of IFO 21. Yugoslavia formed after World War II and was made up of 6 republics and 2 provinces. The leader was Joseph Tito. Yugoslavia began coming apart after Tito's death in 1980. Tensions grew over the next decade until the early 1990s, when the various republics that made up Yugoslavia began declaring their independence for Yugoslavia. During the 1980s, Slobodan Milosevic became the Serb leader. Bosnian Serbs wanted to dominate, and Milosevic wanted what he called a Greater Serbia. In order to do this, Milosevic intended to kill all non-Serbs, particularly the Muslim Bosniaks. Radovan Karadzic supported Milosevic and created an army just before the war began. This army began a policy of cleansing the region of all non-Serbs. Serbs began killing Muslims and non-Serbs on a massive scale. At trial at The Hague after the war, this killing was found to be ethnic cleansing. Milosevic and Karadzic would later be found guilty of war crimes. On April 6, 1992, the Bosnian Serbs began their siege of Sarajevo. The siege lasted for 43 months with intense shelling, bombing, and gunfire. The people were cut off from food, utilities, and communication. More than 12,000 residents of Sarajevo were killed during this time. Those that survived on average lost more than 30 pounds. Throughout the war, the United Nations refused to intervene because they didn't want to get in the way of what they saw as a civil war. The Bosnian Serb forces attacked towns in the summer of 1995 that the UN had declared safe havens for refugees. Women and children Bosniaks were bussed away, where many were raped, beaten, or killed. The men were killed on the spot or bussed to mass kill sites. As many as 7,000 to 8,000 men were killed at the town of Srebrenica. The UN and NATO finally responded. They forced Milosevic to enter into negotiations in Dayton, Ohio, and to sign what was called the Dayton Peace Accord.
Well, Secretary Brown, as you know, is on a very important mission to build support for both trade ties and economic assistance to former Yugoslavia as we implement the civilian aspects of the peace accords that have brought some measure of peace to Bosnia and to former Yugoslavia.
Secretary Brown had invited the business executives to come build housing, phone lines, highways, things a war zone needs to come back to life.
The morning of the crash, the delegates visited a thermoelectric power plant outside of Tuzla, Bosnia. The Commerce Secretary was exploring business opportunities for U.S. companies. Each delegate was a representative of a much-needed industry for rebuilding. These men were leaders in their respective field. There were power generation engineers, construction specialists, and material providers such as paint and glass. There were water technology specialists, design firms, and road builders. The delegation unfortunately encountered firsthand the ravages of war on infrastructures in this region. The war had destroyed much of the navigation equipment needed to fly into the country's airports. At the time of the crash, Dubrovnik did not have radar to track incoming or outgoing planes. This is exactly the expertise this delegation could have exchanged with the Croatians. Colonel John Mazurowski, the deputy commander of the 86th Airlift Division, had asked for a waiver from Air Force headquarters in November of 1995 to allow the Air Force to use Dubrovnik Airport. In January 1996, the waiver was denied and Dubrovnik Airport was left unapproved. Had the order been followed, IFO-21 would not have attempted a landing at Dubrovnik Airport. The minimum descent altitude was not up to U.S. standards given the mountainous terrain. The minimum descent altitude, or MDA, prevents a plane from going too low before it can see the airport. U.S. standards would have required a higher MDA. St. John's Mountain is to the left of the runway. The mountain is 2,300 feet. The MDA was listed as 2,150 feet. The plane impacted at 2,175 feet, 25 feet higher than what was listed as safe. Lastly, the aircrew failed to identify the missed approach point. The missed approach point is the point at which the pilot must pull up and turn away if they do not have visual contact with the airport.
Today, to see three of the companies here, to see Bechtel and Parsons, to know that Bechtel has done such wonderful work right here in this country in terms of the roads that are being built, to know that the mission still carries such significance and that the legacy carries on.
I, myself, in those days was a diplomat coming often to this part of the world, and for those of you who weren't here, I can tell you that it was a far different place in Croatia in 1996 than it is today. This country was just emerging from the very dark days of a long war. It was beginning the process of rebuilding, establishing a national identity, getting itself back together.
On April 3, 1996, the lives of 35 families changed forever. The delegation of businessmen was designed to bring hope for rebuilding an area destroyed by war. They may not have finished what they set out to do, but their companies and others went on to exchange ideas and expertise that resulted in new opportunities and growth for the people of this region.
Even as we grieve for what their lives might have been, let us celebrate what their lives were. For their public achievements and their private victories of love and kindness and devotion are things that no one could do anything but treasure.